Racist teacher spills acid on black girl's Afro hair. Not knowing her mother was watching a cruel act against a young girl shakes a community. But the child's mother, who's closer than the teacher realizes, has a plan to expose the shocking truth. And if you cherish your family and love stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and avoid 10 years of bad luck. The morning sun filtered through the windows of Maplewood Elementary School, casting long shadows across Mrs. Thompson's meticulously organized classroom. She moved between the desks, adjusting a paper here, straightening a pencil there, her pearl necklace catching the light as she bent down to help students with their morning work. To most observers, she appeared to be the quintessential elementary school teacher, patient, attentive, and seemingly caring. "Remember, children," Mrs. Thompson said, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness that had become her trademark. "Presentation is everything." She paused near Tommy's desk, praising his neatly written cursive. "See how Tommy keeps his letters perfectly aligned? That's what we strive for. Order, discipline, conformity." The word conformity lingered in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. While her actions seemed benevolent, there was an undercurrent of rigidity in her approach. When Jessica, a Hispanic student, asked a question, Mrs. Thompson's response came with a slightly condescending tone, suggesting she repeat the question in proper English. The other students noticed these subtle differences in treatment, but most stayed silent. Outside the school, Angela Matthews adjusted Maya's backpack one last time. At 8 years old, Maya was a burst of energy and curiosity, her natural hair styled in 2 perfect puffs that bounced as she moved. "Remember what we talked about?" Angela asked, smoothing down Maya's yellow dress. "Yes, Mom. Head up. Mind sharp. Heart brave," Maya recited, beaming with confidence. Her brown eyes sparkled with excitement about the day ahead. She had spent the previous evening carefully selecting her outfit and preparing her presentation about African American scientists for the class's Heroes Among Us project. Angela watched her daughter skip toward the entrance, pride swelling in her chest. Maya had inherited her determination and her father's infectious optimism. Since James's passing 2 years ago, Angela had worked twice as hard to ensure Maya grew up feeling confident and supported. As a single mother and local journalist, she'd made sure to instill in Maya a strong sense of self-worth and cultural pride. The morning progressed smoothly until Maya's presentation. She stood at the front of the class, confidently discussing Mae Jemison's achievements, when Mrs. Thompson's facade began to crack. The teacher's smile remained fixed, but her eyes hardened as Maya spoke about breaking barriers and representing Black excellence. "Thank you, Maya," Mrs. Thompson interrupted, her voice tight. "But perhaps we should focus on more traditional scientists." She glanced meaningfully at Maya's hair. "And speaking of traditions, I notice you've chosen a rather distracting hairstyle today. In my day, we preferred a more groomed appearance." The classroom fell silent. Maya's hands instinctively went to her hair, her confidence visibly deflating. A few students shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others avoided eye contact. Sarah, a white student in the front row, opened her mouth to speak, but quickly closed it when Mrs. Thompson shot her a warning glance. "I don't understand," Maya said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "My mom says my hair is beautiful. It's part of who I am." Mrs. Thompson's smile tightened further. "Your mother's opinion is her own, dear. But in this classroom, we have standards. Perhaps you could consider something more appropriate for tomorrow?" The tension in the room was palpable. Maya's presentation poster, featuring brilliant Africa and American scientists throughout history, seemed to mock the situation's irony. Here was a young girl celebrating achievement and innovation, being told that her natural appearance wasn't appropriate for a learning environment. A few students began whispering among themselves. Tommy, who had been praised earlier, looked confused, glancing between his perfectly aligned handwriting and Maya's hurt expression, as if trying to understand why neat letters were more important than someone's feelings. The bell rang for recess, but the atmosphere remained heavy. As students filed out, Sarah lingered behind, watching Maya slowly gather her presentation materials. Mrs. Thompson busied herself at her desk, acting as if nothing unusual had happened, but her rigid posture betrayed her awareness of the situation's impact. Outside, Maya sat alone on a bench, her usually bouncing hair puffs seeming to droop with her spirits. The incident marked a turning point, a moment when childish innocence confronted the harsh reality of prejudice. Unknown to Maya, her mother was about to pick her up early for a dentist appointment and would soon witness a scene that would change their lives forever. The morning's events had set the stage for a confrontation that would expose the deep-seated prejudices lurking beneath Maplewood Elementary's peaceful facade. Mrs. Thompson's mask of propriety had slipped, revealing glimpses of the storm brewing beneath. A storm that would soon break with devastating consequences. The afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across Mrs. Thompson's classroom as she reached into her desk drawer. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face remained composed. The container she pulled out was unmarked, its contents clear and seemingly harmless. Maya sat at her desk, still upset from the morning's events, unaware of what was about to unfold. "Maya, dear," Mrs. Thompson called, her voice honey-sweet but eyes cold. "Come here. Let me help you look more presentable." Before Maya could react, Mrs. Thompson had uncapped the container. In one swift motion, she poured the acidic substance over Maya's hair. The reaction was immediate. A searing pain spread across Maya's scalp as the chemical burned through her hair and skin. Her scream pierced the afternoon quiet, sending other students scrambling back in horror. The acidic smell filled the room as Maya's beautiful hair began to disintegrate. Angela, who had arrived early for Maya's dentist appointment, heard her daughter's scream from the parking lot. She dropped her purse and ran, her heart pounding against her ribs. Other parents, also arriving for afternoon pickup, followed the sound of chaos. Inside the classroom, Maya had collapsed to the floor, crying in pain. Mrs. Thompson stood frozen, the empty container still in her hand, as if shocked by her own actions. The other students had pressed themselves against the walls, some crying, others staring in disbelief. Angela burst through the door and took in the scene before her. Her daughter, her beautiful Maya, lay curled on the floor, parts of her scalp angry red and blistering. The sight of her child in pain ignited something primal in Angela. She rushed to Maya, careful not to touch the affected areas. "Someone call an ambulance," Angela shouted, her voice carrying the authority of a mother protecting her child. Parents who had followed her began pulling out phones, while others corralled the frightened students from the room. Mrs. Thompson finally moved, attempting to approach with a damp cloth. "I was only trying to help," she stammered, but Angela's fierce glare stopped her in her tracks. "Don't you dare come near my daughter," Angela warned, her voice low and dangerous. She cradled Maya's head in her lap, using her cardigan to create a barrier between the acid and untouched skin. "What did you use?" "The paramedics will need to know." Mrs. Thompson's face had gone pale, the reality of her actions finally setting in. She backed away, bumping into desks as she retreated. Other teachers had arrived now, drawn by the commotion. The principal, Mr. Roberts, appeared in the doorway, his face darkening as he assessed the situation. The wait for the ambulance felt eternal. Maya's soft whimpers tore at Angela's heart as she whispered comforting words to her daughter. Around them, the room buzzed with horrified whispers and the click of phone cameras documenting the scene. When the paramedics finally arrived, they worked quickly to neutralize the acid and stabilize Maya. Angela never let go of her daughter's hand, even as they loaded her into the ambulance. The sight of Maya's once proud hair puffs now partially destroyed, her scalp marked with chemical burns, filled Angela with a rage she had never known. As the ambulance doors closed, Angela caught a glimpse of Mrs. Thompson being led away by the principal. The teacher's face showed no remorse, only concern for herself. In that moment, Angela made a decision. This wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many other incidents. She would fight for Maya, for justice, and for every child who had ever faced discrimination in silence. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and medical terminology. Maya had stopped crying, falling into a shocked silence that worried Angela more than the tears. The paramedics worked efficiently, applying burn treatments and monitoring Maya's vital signs. In the emergency room, doctors documented every burn, every bit of damage. Angela watched, memorizing details she knew she'd need later. This wasn't just an assault. It was a hate crime. Her journalist's instincts kicked in, even as her mother's heart ached. Nurses came and went, bringing supplies and sympathy in equal measure. One of them, an older black woman, squeezed Angela's shoulder as she passed. "Don't let this slide," she whispered. "We've been letting it slide too long." Maya finally spoke as they waited for test results. "Mom," she said, her voice small, "why does she hate my hair so much?" The question broke Angela's heart all over again. She held her daughter's hand tighter, feeling the weight of generations of similar questions, similar pain. "There's nothing wrong with your hair, baby," she assured Maya. "There's something wrong with people who can't see its beauty." As night fell outside the hospital windows, Angela began making calls. To family, to friends, to contacts from her journalism days. By morning, everyone would know what happened at Maplewood Elementary. By morning, their fight would begin. Angela found herself in a coffee shop surrounded by 5 other mothers, each with their own story of discrimination at Maplewood Elementary. Sarah's mom, Jennifer, had organized the impromptu meeting after hearing about Maya's incident. "It wasn't just your daughter," said Maria Rodriguez, whose son had been forced to anglicize his name. "Thompson's been targeting minority students for years, but nobody would listen." The women shared their experiences. Children made to feel ashamed of their lunch foods, cultural celebrations excluded from holiday events, subtle discouragements from joining advanced programs. Patricia Chin described how her daughter was repeatedly passed over for speaking parts in school plays despite her talent. Angela took notes, her journalist training kicking in. "We need to document everything," she said. "Every incident, every comment, every subtle act of discrimination. We're building a case." The group decided to form Maplewood Parents for Change. They created a secure online forum for families to report incidents and began planning a town hall meeting. Word spread quickly through parent networks, and soon their inbox filled with stories spanning years. That evening, Angela found Maya in her room, staring at old photos. The hospital had saved what they could of her hair, but large patches were gone, leaving painful reminders of the attack. "Mom," Maya whispered, "am I ugly now?" Angela sat beside her daughter, heartbreaking. "No, baby. You're beautiful, and strong, and brave. But the other kids..." Maya's voice trailed off. "Tell me about the other kids," Angela encouraged gently. Maya described the whispers, the stares, the way some students moved away from her at lunch. But she also talked about Sarah, who had shared her lunch when Maya forgot hers, and Marcus, who told off a boy who made fun of her bandages. "You know what I see?" Angela said, holding up a photo of Maya from before the incident. "I see the same brilliant, beautiful girl in both these pictures. Mrs. Thompson didn't just attack your hair. She attacked your spirit. But your spirit is stronger than she knows." Maya leaned against her mother. "I'm scared to go back." "I know, baby, but remember what we always say. Head up, mind sharp, heart brave," they recited together. The next day, the parents group held their first official meeting at the public library. Over 30 families attended, representing various ethnicities and backgrounds. They shared stories, planned strategies, and began drafting a formal complaint to the school board. Jennifer, using her experience as a legal secretary, helped organize the documentation. Maria, who ran a popular local restaurant, offered to cater future meetings. Each parent brought their own skills and resources to the cause. As they worked, Angela noticed something remarkable. The children who had been victimized were forming their own support network. Maya and several other students had started having lunch together, sharing stories and building confidence in their shared experiences. The meeting concluded with a powerful commitment. They would not stop until Maplewood Elementary became a place where every child felt safe and valued. The fight was just beginning, but they weren't fighting alone anymore. Angela spread documents across her dining room table, reviewing reports of past incidents involving Mrs. Thompson. Her research revealed a disturbing pattern: complaints dismissed, incidents downplayed, and families who eventually left Maplewood rather than continue fighting. She prepared meticulously for the community meeting, organizing testimonies chronologically. The evidence was damning. 15 years of documented discrimination, carefully hidden behind a veneer of professionalism. The community center buzzed with tension as over 200 people filed in. School board members sat in the front row, looking uncomfortable. Principal Roberts fidgeted with his tie, avoiding eye contact. Parents began sharing their stories. A father described how Mrs. Thompson had told his son to speak proper English despite his perfect grammatical usage. A mother recounted how her daughter's cultural presentation was cut short for being too exotic. Then came the turning point. Mrs. Thompson herself burst through the doors, her lawyer in tow. "This is slander," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "I've served this community for decades. These accusations are baseless." Angela stood, calm but determined. Baseless. She projected photos of Maya's injuries onto the screen. "Tell that to my daughter. Tell that to every child who went home crying because you made them feel less than human." The room fell silent. Mrs. Thompson's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she pushed him away. "I was maintaining standards," she insisted. "These children need to learn how to fit in." "Fit in?" Angela's voice cut through the tension. "My daughter nearly lost her scalp because you decided her natural hair didn't fit in. That's not education. That's assault." Parents began standing up, one by one, adding their voices to Angela's. Each story built upon the last, creating a devastating picture of systematic discrimination. The school board members exchanged glances. The evidence was impossible to ignore. Mrs. Thompson's face grew increasingly pale as she realized her usual tactics wouldn't work this time. The C, immunity had found its voice, and they wouldn't be silenced again. Sarah approached Maya during lunch break, her blue eyes filled with determination. "I want to help with your diversity project," she declared. Maya, still healing from her injuries, looked surprised but pleased. The two girls began collecting stories from students of different backgrounds. Chinese New Year celebrations, Diwali traditions, African customs. Each story added color to their growing tapestry of cultural experiences. Angela helped the girls organize their material into presentations. They created posters showcasing different holidays, traditional clothing, and family celebrations. Other students began contributing, bringing photos and artifacts from home. The project gained momentum. Students started asking questions about each other's cultures, sharing lunch foods, and learning words in different languages. The school hallways transformed into galleries of diverse traditions. Mrs. Thompson watched this transformation with growing anger. She began marking down students involved in the project, finding arbitrary reasons to reduce their grades. When confronted by parents, she claimed she was maintaining academic standards. Sarah's involvement particularly irritated Mrs. Thompson. During class, she frequently interrupted Sarah's contributions, suggesting she was confused about her priorities. But Sarah stood firm, her friendship with Maya growing stronger despite the pressure. The project culminated in a cultural fair where students presented their research. Parents packed the gymnasium, many wearing traditional clothing. The energy was electric as children proudly shared their heritage. Mrs. Thompson attempted to discredit the event, claiming it disrupted normal learning activities. But her complaints fell on deaf ears as the school board members, attending the fair, witnessed firsthand the educational value of cultural exchange. A crowd gathered outside Maplewood Elementary, carrying signs demanding justice. Angela organized the protest meticulously, ensuring it remained peaceful while making their message clear. The signs read "Stop Discrimination" and "Justice for Maya." Local news vans arrived, their cameras capturing the diverse group of protesters. Parents, students, and community members shared their stories on camera. The reporter from Channel 4 interviewed Angela about the acid incident and subsequent investigation. "This isn't just about Maya," Angela told the cameras. "It's about every child who's been made to feel ashamed of who they are." Mrs. Thompson's actions were the tipping point, but the problem runs deeper. The protest gained traction on social media. #JusticeForMaya started trending locally, bringing more attention to systemic discrimination in schools. Parents from neighboring districts joined in solidarity. That evening, Maya watched the news coverage with her mother. "You're fighting for everyone, aren't you, Mom?" she asked. Yes, baby. Sometimes it takes one person standing up to help others find their courage. The school board announced an emergency meeting to address the situation. Mrs. Thompson remained defiant, but her support among faculty was crumbling as more teachers came forward with their own observations of her behavior. Angela stood at the podium during the school board hearing, her prepared speech in hand. The room was packed with community members, media, and school officials. My daughter Maya came to school excited to learn. Instead, she learned that some people would rather destroy her spirit than see her succeed. Mrs. Thompson didn't just attack my daughter's hair. She attacked her identity, her self-worth, and her right to exist as she is. Angela presented evidence. Photographs of Maya's injuries, documented patterns of discrimination, testimonies from other families. Her voice remained steady as she described the systematic way Mrs. Thompson had targeted minority students. This isn't about one incident or one teacher. It's about a system that allowed this behavior to continue unchecked for years. How many children have to be hurt before we say enough? Throughout her speech, Mrs. Thompson's face grew increasingly pale. Other teachers in attendance shifted uncomfortably, some nodding in agreement with Angela's words. The board members listened intently, taking notes. When Angela finished, the room erupted in applause. Several parents stood up, sharing their own experiences, each story building upon the last. The tide was turning. Even those who had previously defended Mrs. Thompson couldn't ignore the weight of evidence and emotion in the room. The administration's complacent attitude toward discrimination was exposed for all to see. Mrs. Thompson launched a counter-campaign, claiming she was being persecuted for maintaining traditional values. She sent emails to sympathetic parents, portraying herself as a victim of cancel culture. Angela discovered damning evidence from Mrs. Thompson's previous school district. Former students came forward with similar stories of discrimination, including one incident where she'd cut a student's hair without permission. The evidence mounted, documented complaints spanning 2 decades, emails showing racial bias, and testimonies from former teaching assistants who'd quit because of her behavior. During a final community meeting, Angela presented everything. Parents gasped at the scope of Mrs. Thompson's actions. Sarah's mother, a retired lawyer, pointed out potential legal violations in multiple incidents. Mrs. Thompson attempted to defend herself. "I've dedicated my life to education. These accusations are taking things out of context." Angela responded by playing recordings from former students, their voices describing years of systematic discrimination. The room fell silent as the truth became undeniable. The school board convened for the disciplinary hearing. The evidence was clear. Decades of discriminatory behavior, culminating in the assault on Maya. Parents, students, and teachers filled the auditorium. Mrs. Thompson sat rigidly, her lawyer whispering advice. She attempted to paint herself as a misunderstood traditionalist, but her arguments fell flat against the mountain of evidence. The board deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, their decision was unanimous. Immediate termination of Mrs. Thompson's employment and a recommendation for the state to revoke her teaching license. The crowd erupted in applause. Maya, sitting beside Angela, squeezed her mother's hand. Other victims of Mrs. Thompson's discrimination hugged each other, tears flowing freely. As the room cleared, several board members approached Angela, expressing their regret for not acting sooner. The superintendent announced plans for mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff. A week after the hearing, Angela received an anonymous letter filled with stories from former students who'd faced discrimination from Mrs. Thompson. Each expressed gratitude for finally feeling heard. Mrs. Thompson, however, wasn't finished. She filed a defamation lawsuit against Angela and other parents, claiming they'd orchestrated a conspiracy to destroy her career. During the court proceedings, Angela revealed her strongest evidence, a security camera video showing Mrs. Thompson deliberately pouring acid on Maya's hair. The footage, previously withheld pending investigation, left no room for doubt about her actions. The judge dismissed Mrs. Thompson's lawsuit and recommended criminal charges. She was later convicted of assault and banned from teaching nationwide. The story made national headlines, sparking discussions about discrimination in schools. Maya returned to school, her hair growing back stronger. She and Sarah started a student diversity council that became a model for other schools. Their friendship symbolized the change they'd fought for. Angela received awards for her advocacy, but her real victory was seeing Maya smile again, proud of her identity. The morning ritual of head up, mind sharp, heart brave became Maplewood's unofficial motto. The story's most powerful revelation came during Mrs. Thompson's sentencing. Her own granddaughter testified about witnessing years of racist behavior, finally breaking family silence. This testimony revealed how prejudice can poison generations until someone finds the courage to stand against it. Maplewood transformed into a beacon of inclusivity. The incident that nearly destroyed Maya instead strengthened an entire community, proving that courage and truth can overcome generations of prejudice. Roots of Courage became more than just Maya and Angela's story. It became a testament to the power of standing up for justice, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds.